Hi, my name is Abby Potter. I'm a Senior Innovation Specialist with the Library of Congress Labs team, and I'm really happy to welcome you and to open this event, which it's going to be a great event. There's going to be some learning about the collections of the American Folklife Center here at the library. There's going to be some exploration, using sort of digital methods, sort of looking new ways to sort of look at our collections and learn about our collections, and there's going to be music and talking. So it's going to be a jam-packed hour and plus a little bit. So we're really happy that you all came, and I'm also very happy to introduce our host for today, who's Patrick Egan. He is a scholar and musician from Ireland who is just finishing up a digital studies fellowship here at the Kluge Center, which is our sort of scholar center here at the Library of Congress. And then he's immediately next on to a Fulbright Tech Impact Scholarship. He recently submitted his PhD in digital humanities with ethnomusicology at the University of College Cork. My team, the library labs team, first met Patrick when he started as a digital studies fellow. It's a fellowship that we work with the Kluge Center closely together on, where it's trying to attract people to come use our collections who are using sort of the most sort of contemporary digital methods to help us improve our services and sort of help us enable researchers to answer their questions and help us improve how we help people using digital methods to do their research. We host. I also want to mention that the sort of experiment there. We have an experiments page on our website. This is our website, labs.lsc.gov, and shortly we'll feature an experiment that will sort of encapsulate Patrick's experience here, where people can dig into the visualizations that he's going to show today and sort of see the code that was created and hopefully build on what he's created. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it off to Patrick right now.
Thank you all. Thank you very much, and especially for everyone for coming if you're coming from outside the DC and from your busy work schedules, and I know everyone is busy at 12 o'clock on a Thursday. I'd like to begin by thanking the people and institutions that have enabled me to undertake the research that I'm going to present, in particular the staff and researchers at the Kluge Center, the American Folklife Center, the Fulbright Commission, and the Library of Congress Labs. I'm grateful for the opportunities that have been presented to me, and I can't overstate how helpful it's been to be surrounded by staff, researchers, performers of Irish traditional music, and the enormous amount of well-wishers I've had here since the start. So, as some of you already know, I have been a Kluge Center Digital Fellow since January and just took up the Fulbright Tech Impact Award. And both of these research grants are involved with the collections of Irish traditional music at the American Folklife Center. They're also focused more broadly on the impact of the digital turn. And in this case, my project is dubbed Connections in Sound, which explores the ways that we can access sound files within the Irish traditional music community and on the World Wide Web. The research I've been carrying out explores the emerging trends and new phenomena which may generate changes of consequence in our digital worlds as we continue to engage with digital resources. So when I look around now, I see a broad range of experience in this room, from music history to digital expertise, to ethnomusicology, to folklore, and performance of music. It's been a pleasure to get to know everyone individually here. And working at everyone from all of these diverse different fields has been the most fascinating thing that I've never before had the chance to do. So it's really exciting to have this, and hopefully it'll make for a good discussion here today. Bringing the panel together allows us not just to deliver a talk, but to listen to a number of different voices, to hear different perspectives on a range of ideas. I hope to bring these together and introducing conversations at different points during the event. In my research, I draw inspiration from a range of different disciplines. This is key to today's conversation. All of the ideas I've imbued this research stem from different levels and are imbued and imbricated, such as in places such as archival science, ethnomusicology, computer science, digital humanities, and oral history. For the next hour, let me briefly introduce the disciplinary context that makes up this project, which situates the research. I'll talk about some of the aims of the research. I'll then walk through some of the sounds and project workflows that were used in the Connections and Sound project. And after that, I'll move towards concluding remarks about future research, and then we'll have a performance. So from archival science, I draw inspiration from the recent movements within the world of linked data. For instance, in June this year, the Irish Traditional Music Archive in Dublin, Ireland, published the first linked data structure, which allows us to better define Irish traditional music on the World Wide Web. The work of scholars at the ITMA demonstrates how we can interlink resources of Irish traditional music to better enable discovery, their reuse, and use again. The ITMA's work on the Linked Irish Traditional Music Project, or LITMUS, is important to this research. I'll speak with a panel member, Matt Miller, about the Linked Jazz Project as a music-specific development that also utilizes resources from the web. In computer science and digital humanities, there are a number of inspirational developments which inform the research. For instance, Tim Berners-Lee, professed inventor of the web and linked data initiator, suggested a scheme for data which mirrors the work of others, such as the Force 11 group, a community of scholars who strive to make data more findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. The Connections and Sound project you will see today follows and instills these key principles in order to explore novel ways of representing material from the American Folklife Center. Panel member Nicole Saylor from the Center provided key guidance early on about what was available to me, but also on how to enrich the data that was being gathered along the way. Irish music studies also adds to this research. In the past 30 years, there's been a noticeable rise in the amount of resources for Irish traditional music appearing online, sparking interest and a growing research trend in studies of virtual environments, but also in papers in how resources are structured and shared by performers. A number of studies and research papers by ethnomusicologists have focused on popular websites such as thesession.org, the Online Academy of Irish Music, and others to understand more fully the role that these resources play in the lives of performers, and indeed how performers interact with them. In one sense, research into this area has only begun. As noted by Ward in 2016, a more in-depth analysis of the role of online archives, such as the Irish Traditional Music Archive, the Cultus Archive, as repositories of oral memory, present further research opportunities. So far, these studies have mostly focused on enculturation and learning in the online environment. In most cases, it's been carried out within Ireland. Researchers such as Waldron and Veblen have shown how interaction occurs in the US. However, we've yet to more fully understand how audio files are being used by these communities. So that's the disciplinary context to this project. What this project aims to achieve and what it does not do is another thing I'd like to talk about. It seeks to understand more fully the use of audio files in Irish traditional music community here in North America, to understand the process of connecting references from hidden audio files in the American Folklife Center to other resources on the web, to understand what happens when we bring visibility to information and resources that otherwise would remain hidden. And in that process, what are the kinds of decisions that have to be made based on the data and the digital infrastructure available to us? Instead of focusing on issues that are often prevalent in this area, such as copyright and digitization, I want to concentrate rather on how we can use technology for linking audio recordings, digitized or not, copyrighted or not. So Connections and Sound asks other questions like, what's the nature of the material at the American Folklife Center? What are the challenges it presents as a case study when attempting to connect to other audio files, to the World Wide Web? And what problems arise when we attempt to unite these tunes, songs, and dances? The American Folklife Center, as we all know, contains thousands of hours of recorded sound, a significant amount of Irish traditional music archive tracks which emerged throughout the 20th century. So far, in this project, these musical pieces have been identified for over 37 collections and counting, from collectors and recorders who engage with a variety of different formats and technologies. So to ease us into the conversation about the general background of the collections and the workflow of the project, I'd like to start with one of the earliest known examples of Irish traditional music that is accessible from the American Folklife Center, a wax cylinder recording. Okay, so that was the very first introduction we get to the Monaghan Jig. Musicians, singers, dancers of Irish traditional music in the room here would recognize that important recording straight away from the Francis O'Neill Cylinders collection. But for others, it was the famous piper Patsy Toohey, originally from County Galway, who emigrated to the US in the late 1800s and recorded in Chicago around 1904. The interesting thing about Toohey's version of the Monaghan Jig here was that it was long assumed that the fourth part was originally composed by the fiddler Michael Coleman in 1921. When the wax cylinders were discovered, the fourth part was resounded from Toohey's era, having existed 2 decades before Coleman's iconic record. The Ward Archive in Wisconsin describes the track to be found to be even more elaborate than Michael Coleman's. Toohey's brilliance continues to be an important inspiration to young pipers growing up in the music scene today. It's striking to hear Toohey's playing, and even more so that Toohey's story comes from a different world, where technology, musical practice, and the sharing of music would be alien to today's digital environment. And little could he have guessed that his music would be accessed from any part of the world with an internet connection and possibly linked to other recordings of the same tune. So from the early age of recorded sound, it's interesting to note that performers like Toohey actually recorded their own music and introduced titles of tracks on top of the audio. We can see from the wax cylinder casing that's in the Ward Archive that the names of tunes were also added. Throughout the collections at the American Folklife Center, I found the level of descriptive information about the music is dependent on factors such as the original recording format, and nowhere else are there many different ways to find descriptive information about this music. This variety is something that intrigued me and became a challenge from the start of this project as I began to build a data set of tunes, songs, and dances. For example, just as mentioned, there are recordings of short excerpts from people like Toohey, where we can only get the name of the piece and wonder about where he learned it. Compare that recording then with the endless amounts of concert performances from collections of the folk revival that we'll hear later on, performers delivering lengthy stories to eager audiences about the musical pieces, their background information, and the details about the composers or even influences. So here is a visualization, or you could call a snapshot, that reflects the access to various tunes, songs, and stories that we had encountered here by April 2019, last April. Okay, so I first heard about this wide range of recordings of Irish traditional music at the American Folklife Center from folklorist Dr. Nancy Gross. And if I could ask Nancy to come up, we'll have a chat about this in a second. Upon connecting with Dr. Todd Harvey and finding traces of old and more contemporary recordings of Irish traditional music, I was enthralled with the results. I'm thankful for the support of all the members of the AFC in my search for the collections, and especially the help with the initial search that was carried out here in January. In my very daunting quest to find the collections that housed recordings from throughout the 20th century. So, Dr. Nancy Gross. Dr. Nancy Gross, folklorist at the American Folklife Center. So, as can be seen from this visualization, the pathways to the recordings, the points of entry for searching a material across the 20th century are varied. A better look at it here. So some of you might have seen this in blogs before. As data that describes these collections also varies. Nancy, I was interested in hearing you describe the differences between the collections that are in the American Folklife Center, where Irish traditional music emerges from early recordings to the life stories and biographies of performers that we hear in the Folklife survey collections. In some ways, when you dive into them, they're kind of like parallel worlds where different musicians came over in different ways of immigration, and then people who live in America, even American people playing Irish music over here, there's all this kind of mix-up happening all the time. So it's quite a kind of labyrinth of a task when you start to kind of get through all of this information that's in these places. Yeah, so I'd like to ask a little bit more about what's your take on it.
Are we doing it
Let's
here?
go.
Oh, we're going to do it. Okay.
Testing 1, 2. I think this one is on. Okay, that's fine. 1, 2.
Thanks for everybody coming out this afternoon. It's good to see you all here. Welcome to the library. So.
Yeah, I was really interested. The first time I met Nancy was in the folklore department of UCC, University College Cork, about 2 years ago, when we met with our friend Marie-Unique Desplanck, who was a folklorist there in the university.
We were doing the town, I think.
We were, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a few sessions of music in different places, like the Corner House. Some of you might know Cork, the Corner House and the Chine and different places like that. But Nancy was over on a trip to.
I have to say it was sort of a vacation, and I hadn't had the pleasure of being to Cork before, so I was getting a tour. It was terrific. So yeah.
Nancy was introducing me to the different collections that were there. She said, "Oh, have you heard about much of the recordings in the American Folklife Center?" And I had no idea about it. So once I had started going through the collections with Dr. Todd Harvey over here, I started to find all sorts of interesting things. And one of the conversations I had with Nancy about all of this was that there was this sort of like parallel worlds that were happening between all of these musicians. But even though we found about 37 different collections, Nancy says to me that there's way more as well on top of all of that.
Well, there's a difference between what we have online and what's available online and very obviously is Irish and other collections that have Irish materials in there. I think it's terrific that it's all going online. I would point out, this is very low tech, but I brought a physical copy. The American Folklife Center, for those of us who don't speak fluent computerese, has something called finding aids. And this is a finding aids to our Ireland and Northern Ireland collections. And it's somewhat dated. It was done in 2012, so it needs to be updated because we've done a considerable amount of Irish programming and also taken in some large collections with significant Irish music holdings in the meantime. But you can get this either from us or you can download this online. But not everything in here is digitized. I just want to make that point.
Oh, one of the very interesting things about the Ireland collections is that there's amazing material that I had never seen very much of. But once I started moving into the collections in North America, I started to find that there was lots of different crossover. And one of the collections in particular that Sidney Cowell Robertson collected for the WPA project in the 1930s had very interesting finds in it too, even though we wouldn't associate with certain areas with having Irish traditional music. There was music found in these remote places, like out in California and up in Montana and different places like that, especially in Wisconsin as well, in remote places there.
Mm-hmm. We have really two flavors of collections. One is Irish music collected in Ireland, and the other is Irish music collected in the United States. Some of the people did both, like Sidney Robertson Cowell did both, some early collecting for the WPA, in which he identified Californian artists of Irish descent and did some interesting recordings. But then about 20 years later, she went to the Aran Islands and did recording there. So it's sometimes not an either-or situation. Same with the Lomaxes, both John and Alan. They collected some Irish performers here, but they also, Alan then went to Ireland in 1951. We have our Lomax specialists over there, Todd Harvey. But I think in 1951, and hooked up with Seamus Innes and did the country. He and a team from Radio Erin went and did a 3-week tour of Ireland, of the Republic, and got all the way up to Galway. And in some ways, it was very much I don't want to say naive American, because he knew some of what he was looking for, and he had Seamus Innes along, which helped a lot. But he was astonished, for example, Lomax was astonished, and Robin Roberts, who was his assistant on the trip, was also astonished to find that people were still speaking Gaelic. They had no idea. I think a highlight of that trip, if I might, was he had a huge hit with Irene Goodnight in the United States. He had it sung back to him as a collector in Galway in Irish about 10 years after it had been a hit in the United States.
So yeah, this is kind of outlines the scale of the sort of task and the challenge of trying to find Irish traditional music in a way, and making connections between collections that were made in the 1930s and what was made in maybe the 1950s. And I just want to play one of the tracks that I discovered, which is the Fisher's Hornpipe, and this is one of the most popular sort of tracks, you could say, that came up from each of the collections. There's not very many of them that do surface in many of the different collections. And I think this kind of speaks to repertoire as well. It kind of gives us an idea of the type of music that was played in for dancers, for instance, in different places. And so if Megan could play it there, it's the Fisher's Hornpipe.
3278, A1, 2, and 3.
We're going to have a series of old fiddle tunes played by Mr. Lazim Brusto of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, in July 1937. Mr. Brusto was champion fiddler of the contest held in Chicago by the Herald and Examiner in Chicago in 1926. He holds the title as champion fiddler of the Midwest. The first thing he's going to play is Fisher's Hornpipe.
So that was Mr. Lazim Brusco, the champion fiddler of the Midwest in 1937. So as the project here progresses, we produced another example of the range of Irish traditional music that was encountered in a visualization that would reflect these geographical locations. And you can see here, the title here is US Census and AFC Collections. And as you drag the slider along these the timeline, you can see the different ways of immigration that would happen. That was just purely as an experiment to see what would happen if we pull this together. Yeah. And if you press on the, yeah, you get it. There you go. Yeah, and then you can see as it moves along the 20th century, we start to get different collections arriving in different locations, especially here in California, over in Iowa, over in Montana as well, when we go up to 1980 at the very end. So it's been really interesting to see how this collection sort of grows and the different types of descriptive data that are in each one. So your early wax cylinder recordings, they sort of have a little bit of information, then the 78 RPM ones have a bit more, and then we start to get a lot of information in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And this is when the Folklife comes into play, right? 1976, I think?
That's when we were established here at the Library of Congress as the American Folklife Center. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that actual year is that it's around the same time as when the Philadelphia Cayley Group collection starts to appear.
Yeah, it's also the same year that the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities were set up, and suddenly there was more funding to underwrite traditional music in the United States.
It's quite interesting to see how recordings that were originally on DAT tape or audio cassette are just let run by the recordist, and we get hours and hours and hours of different introductions to songs, tunes and dances along the way, which is in such contrast then to the collectors of the years before.
Well, it was a different upgrading in technology that allowed you to just start a reel-to-reel tape running and leave it because it wasn't that expensive to do and it was easier to manage rather than having like large, well, either wax cylinders or discs that you had to change. There were also a number of folklorists who at that time got very interested in traditional Irish music in America and sought out people throughout the United States. And foremost among those was probably Mick Maloney, who was working on his doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania at that time, and really sought out. He was originally from Ireland, as I think a lot of you know Mick and his contributions to the field, but he was originally from Ireland, and he came over and started a PhD. And he knew of or sought out a lot of people who hadn't been previously recorded.
It's fascinating listening to Mick Maloney introduce people from the early days in 1976, and as the festival kind of progresses into the 1980s and up to 1987, I think was the last recording that I was able to gather on audio cassette. And I'm just going to play one of the tracks from there. This track is called Bunclody, and happens to be the place where I went to high school.
This is a song now called Bunclody. It concerns a young man from County Wexford, from Bunclody in fact, that emigrated to America because he was found unacceptable to his girlfriend's father because he didn't have enough money or something like that. More likely he didn't have enough money or land or property. So he sought America, like thousands of others, as a cure for his ills. Oh, were I at the Moss House where the birds do increase, at the foot of Mount Leinster or some silent place, by the streams of Bunclody where all fortunes do meet, and all I would ask is one care.
So you kind of get the effect there. That's Andy O'Brien from the Irish tradition, and he was playing later on. You get to hear Billy McComiskey and Brendan Mulvihill join in the middle of the song. But one of the interesting things about these collections is you can find all sorts of information about the pieces themselves. And can you imagine hundreds of hours of listening to that? You get all sorts of artists coming up and introducing the different music that they know, stories about, and people who they learned music from, and the composers who wrote the tunes as well. So there's a sort of a trajectory in the festivals, but I think in a way, for me, kind of signifies like what the American Folklife Center is in a way. It's like I used to think it was a sort of a place where things were preserved from before the 1950s, but actually it's kind of a living archive as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we continue to have Irish and Irish American artists come through. We have a homegrown concert series that has presented quite a number of significant artists in the last really 10 years. And a lecture series, which it's not always on music, but a number of people like John Moulton came at one point to talk about Irish music, and Len Graham, and people who are really significant Irish performers. But we have also had Mick Maloney come to talk about Irish music in America, and this is a little off subject, but in 2007, the American Folklife Center hosted a really interesting discussion on place names in the north of Ireland as a look at the culture of naming and townland naming. Not music exactly, but I think it would probably be of interest to people here. So one way to find out what we have is to get the very physical finding aid, but also just to come in and visit us. The American Folklife Center is open to anybody. You can come in and just use our resources. But there are some other, as you say, we're also in touch with the Irish Traditional Music Archive in Dublin that's been doing a terrific job of putting up a lot of collections. And they have a far higher percentage of their collections up online than we do, just because the sheer volume of what we have.
And it's interesting to see what they're doing with it when it does come online. I just going to move on for time's sake.
Please.
But so speaking of like living and people that are around here today, like some people in the audience here would know a lot of these performers already, and I think it'll be quite interesting for them to see it. We ran a survey since about February in this year, and I've been getting on to a lot of people in America now, trying to ask them to fill in this survey if they're involved in Irish traditional music. And this particular visualization was done quickly on carto.com just to get an idea about the types of results that are coming in and where they're coming in from too. So we've got most of America kind of covered, but we still are working on it and leaving it live. So that'll be live until the end of October or so. There's even a result from Mexico.
Yeah, how many people have responded?
So there's about 450 so far. So as we're kind of developing this understanding of the engagement between different people, I think it's fascinating. There's lots of big spin-offs that are happening from it too, where people are giving us the names of different resources that they use online. And to see the types of resources that people use over here is quite different to what they're using in Ireland. Like a lot of the performers in Ireland, there's specific sites that they kind of go to, but over here it seems to be far wider.
You mean, are they going to repositories? Are they going to libraries? Are they going? How so?
On the digital environment, they seem to be going on to different websites in different places, and that are not usual in Ireland as well. But it's early days yet, so we can't really talk too much about that until we have the results in. So that's the kind of the work that's happening on the project itself. But I'd like to open this up a bit more now to the digital side of this project and some of the other work that's going on with digital labs. The labs team here, I've got Victoria Van Heining, who's going to come up and have a little chat about one of the projects that they're working on. And I'd like to invite you up there now.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria from the Library of Congress by the People Project. You can find us at crowd.loc.gov. And we put different documents from around the library online and ask members of the public to transcribe them, also to review them. And then we take those transcriptions and we publish them on our main library website, which is loc.gov. And we're really excited because next week, can I just leap right into this? Yeah, okay. We're going to be releasing some of the notebooks and letters and field work of Alan Lomax and his collaborators for transcription. We've got about 3,000 pages going live. We're going to focus on America and the Caribbean in the first instance, and then we're going to have a phased release of materials from Europe as well. And this is our first collaboration with AFC. So far, all of our collaborations have been within the manuscript division, where there's a lot of handwritten materials, as you might guess from the name. And so this is really exciting. It's new material, it's a new kind of work and a new kind of life that we're exploring. And one of the other highlights of the collection is the intense collaborative nature of the work. So it's Lomax and his collaborators, his wife, his father, other artists and authors like Zora Neale Hurston, finding tradition bearers from around the world and trying to capture their contributions and ways of life.
I think it's quite interesting to hear about collaboration. It's kind of exciting for me to kind of be in this environment and see different people collaborating that you don't normally get the chance to see, and I'm very thankful for being in this environment. So what sort of outcome do you seek to have at the end of this? Because I know some of the Lomax material there involves Beaver Island recordings eventually.
Yes, so one of the main outcomes that we hope is we make these transcriptions available and they improve search. They also improve ability for people who use screen readers and other adaptive technology to find, so through word search, to find specific documents, but also to be able to read them in place. And one of the other exciting things is we hope that people will be able to take bulk data, so once all of the materials are transcribed, they may wish to analyze patterns in the data. They may be wishing to see if they can find names and correlations across the notebooks, across regions, hopefully. And I can't speak to specific plans that we have about including audio and video, but I and all of my colleagues, including Megan Ferriter, who's formerly at the Smithsonian Transcription Center and is now here at Labs in the library, we're all very excited by the prospect of being able to open crowdsourcing to our audio and video collections in the future.
Just to clarify for people who might not know about crowdsourcing, you're asking members of the public to log on and help transcribe, right?
We are. So anybody can take part. You actually don't even need to set up an account. You can volunteer so long as you have an internet connection. And there's no minimum time that you need to commit to the project. You could do as little as a word or a line and then go on your merry way, play some tunes. But if you get really sucked in, you can spend as much time as you like online. And we also have a lively discussion forum on History Hub where people can chat to other volunteers and to us and to learn about the library in that way. But crowdsourcing is something that, in a way, has been around for centuries, the collaboration between people who might be considered or happily call themselves amateurs, lovers of a subject, and those who maybe are professional or paid to work on said subject. And that can range from gathering data about the stars and the movement of the planets down to interpreting handwritten documents, transcribing audio recordings.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The overlaps between that one and the connections in sound is like creating these data sets and adding to the data bank of text about what's in these documents and interlinking them together, finding ways to bring them together. I'd like to ask Nicole Saylor to come up to chat about some other projects that are happening at the American Folklife Center. And Nicole, you work on a range of projects, including the Occupational Folklife Project, amongst others.
Hi. Yes.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes, so we're working on the Occupational Folklife Project, along with trying to get all of this wonderful audio digitized off of analog media and put online, and so we've got a lot of work to do.
Okay, I found it was fascinating at the start of this project where I was trying to set up meetings and find out how can I collaborate with people and how can I bring them together. When I first met with Nicole and Kelly Ravak, who can't be with us today unfortunately, but we had a fascinating meeting about how can I use the services here in the library, specifically the linked data service and also the American Folklife Society. I think that's right. Ethnographic Thesaurus.
Yes, the Ethnographic Thesaurus. That was sponsored by the American Folklife, the American Folklore Society.
Okay.
Right.
I think the first one, the id.loc.gov, right? That's the linked data service.
Right. Yeah, you're going to want to bring your resident expert up for that.
But
yes, the Ethnographic Thesaurus is available through that site.
Yeah. Just want to show that what we were able to find on the linked data service. So this was very inspiring in the first meeting. I went in and they asked me, so tell us one of your performers that you have in your data set, or a performer in Irish traditional music. And sure enough, I put in one of the famous pipers, Willie Clancy, and it came up straight away. So I was really excited to see that. And then after, when I had been finished with collecting the data from the performances, over 2,600 different tunes and songs and dances, I did a web scrape with Python, web programming language, and I was able to find about, say, 70 to 80% of these performers. Now, some of them hadn't been, sometimes they weren't introduced in something like the Philadelphia Ceilidh group, so you couldn't hear it on the recording who it was. But most of the time, there was information available there. So that got me really excited about this data. So I could start enriching the data that was in the data set, getting the actual name of the performer linked into the Library of Congress and finding out some information from them. some of the problems I got, though, some people weren't actually, they had never published or anything, so they'd never turned up in the collections. They had been interviewed maybe, but they never turned up in the name authorities.
Right. I mean, we have catalogers devoted to creating name authority files, but theirs aren't, too many names.
Yeah, and I had a chat with Patrick Brown over there last week about that, and he works on that every day, and he's kind of saying, yeah, we can draw up a name authority, no problem, anytime.
Do you just want to define what a name authority is for the audience?
Oh, yeah, so the name authority, you're probably best at describing this, but
Go for it.
I'll go from an outside point of view. It's kind of like a personal page that defines a person. So for the musicians here, it's like saying, how do we define Paddy O'Brien from Offaly versus Paddy O'Brien from Tipperary? And so one of these, this ID will be a specific place where you can find one of those musicians and know that it's the one and not the other one.
That's great.
Is that good?
That works.
We had a long conversation a few years ago about James Keane and whether or not it was the same person as Jimmy Keane. And that went back and forth for a while till they asked me, and I happen to know both of them, so.
And it's quite funny, actually. There's a lot of names that are crossing over in the collections, and it's quite a thing to actually have to go in and find out, is that the person from there, here, or there? And then you're listening to the recording and saying, oh, it's okay when they're different musicians and they play different instruments, but when they play the same one, it can be difficult.
It became box versus button. Or keyboard versus
yeah, exactly. So very close. In one is a kind of accordion, one is a button accordion. So so it's been quite interesting in that way. I think also we talked about the ethnographic thesaurus, and I have some examples here of how I use it. Of course, the American Folklife Center provides the ability for people to suggest adding to the thesaurus as well.
That's true, yes. And I think you've made some suggestions as well.
So I had made some suggestions, and we we haven't gone through with it yet officially, right?
Right, we're working on it.
But we're working on it. And so this links into what happens in the ITMA in Dublin. The Litmus Project actually is an anthology that describes the music that's there as well, and so it's quite interesting to see that there. So yeah, the data set itself, it's quite boring, really. For anyone who hasn't seen these data sets, creating it in Google Sheets is not a beautiful thing, but it actually has some quite interesting things going on when you explain it properly. So here is the current August items area. You can see at the very top of each row, you can see, or column, you can see different aspects of the collection data that's there being enriched as we go along. Each one, I created a proof of concept to show if tunes were digital here at the library, then this is what would happen. And by going through that process, I think I kind of leaped over the copyright problem or the digitization problem and kind of just decided to explore what would happen if it was there. Again, there were some issues going through this, and this is what the whole research is about. It's trying to find out what can the digital do and what can the digital not do, and what decisions are made during the time that we're making this project. And this is something I think Matt Miller might be able to talk a little bit more about if you'd like to come up soon. One of the things with creating linked data, as a lot of people who are in it already know, is that you have to get buy-in from other places. The resource is you can only get out of it what you put into it. And so Matt here helped me out early on in the project, and we were looking at ways to see how could we create enriched data and triples from a triple store from the data that we had. Matt, you worked on linked jazz, and I think this is the first kind of point where I connected you from in this project, because I thought you might be able to help me there.
Yeah, so, is this on? Okay. So I work at the library in the Network Development Mark Standards Office, which does things like around linked data, like the ID.lcf.gov site. But I'm also involved in this project called Linked Jazz, which is trying to map the social network of jazz musicians from the early to mid 20th centuries. And we use oral history transcripts. So linked data, or kind of this technology that's underlining Patrick's project, is very flexible in kind of doing this thing. It's kind of like a paradigm shift in how you represent data, going from like a record-based approach to more of these statements. So it's a very powerful tool to kind of tease out these nuanced kind of relationships between different things.
There's also, you can see on screen here, is a data creation and publishing workflow. And one of the interesting overlaps between his project and my one is that they took, I think it was interview tags from musicians. So if a musician mentions another musician that they were collaborating with, then they made a connection between those.
Yeah, so there was about 50 oral history transcripts, and these were done by professionals from various institutions. And so when one individual would say another person's name, we would kind of grab those two individuals, give them identifiers, and then link them together, saying, oh, this person knows this other person somehow, right? And then we have a crowdsourcing tool that we invite people to come into and say, read the transcript and put it into context and say, oh, this was a friend of the person, or they actually toured together, or something more kind of substantial relationship.
There's a quite interesting overlap there between it's the material that's in the Philadelphia Ceilidh Group material there, and we were listening to the transcripts and tagging different parts of the transcripts. So if someone, say, Jimmy Keane was playing a tune and it was, you mentioned his father, then we'd be able to link to his father, and then that would link out again to other resources that are on the web. But one of the challenges we found with Irish traditional music was that in some ways the resources like the Road Index in the EFDSS in the UK, we weren't able to get very good resources to kind of connect to. But I contacted Alan Ing, who works on the irishtune.info website. It's a really good resource full of all this interesting data from CDs of Irish traditional music over the years. And we were eventually able to link in the IDs of tunes so that they could be found on the web properly. But as of yet, we still haven't got a place where Irish tunes can live on the internet. We have the session.org, right? But something like Wikidata would probably be a better place, right?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a fairly new kind of practice emerging, but there are more repositories coming online. Like Wikidata is a really promising place to store this kind of structured data about literally everything in the world. So it's continually advancing and getting better every year.
I'd say even from 2016, actually, is really kind of taken off on Wikidata, right?
Yeah, it's a sister project of Wikipedia. You probably have heard of that. So it's a kind of a crowdsourced or kind of group effort to build structured data together. I mean, it's really a phenomenal project.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things, I know we worked on creating these triples together, which is connecting the data together, but we also worked on, I looked at bringing this, the only other resource I could get at the moment was the Seamus Connolly collection that's in Boston. And that collection has a data set that allows you to go in and link up the tunes that were performed in different places. And I think this is kind of the key to this project. It's not yet finished. We haven't got a proper visualization of it, but I think you might get the idea once we pull it up here. Okay, so this is an example script that I ran on this one, and it's kind of hard to see it from afar, but what you have here is the performer who played a certain tune in the American Folklife Center, and also a performer who played the same tune in the Connolly collection. And in some ways, when we have the IDs for these tunes, we can say for certain that this performer played in both Boston and Library of Congress, places that are 400 miles away. So it's kind of, it shows what can be achievable, right? But as of yet, it's kind of early days in bringing it together.
Yeah, I would just, if you could think of it as like a graph of knowledge, right? This is a new format for being able to query these kind of bits of information. So it's a really big change on going from like a record-based, like searching for records, to actually being able to ask questions to this knowledge graph.
And that's quite interesting. And if anyone has any questions from the floor at the moment, yeah, Noel Fahy. That's actually a very interesting point, because in part of the survey, I'm asking performers what do they think about liner notes, and it's really interesting the responses that are coming out, what people like to use and what they think is important. And I think that's a really interesting thing that I could pick up on here, because the project in the Irish Traditional Music Archive uses liner notes. It uses like 30 different CDs from 1960 to 1980 or something like that. And what the Litmus Project does is that it links up the notes that are very important in those CDs to different resources that are there. And so actually the CDs are very important in that way. And I can imagine how downloads is a totally different kettle of fish.
It's really interesting, thank you all. I did some research on Irish traditional music is played in Washington and Baltimore areas in history. And one database that I found really helpful at the Library of Congress is the digitized newspaper data bank. I'm not sure people are aware, but a huge number of newspapers have been digitized with searchable text. Daily newspapers, maybe because I'm a former newspaper reporter, I went right to this, but you can actually pick newspapers from metropolitan areas. Washington is very well represented with dozens of newspapers historically in Washington area. And you can search for performers, tunes, the term Irish traditional music. I found that reels was not a good thing to search for. I ended up with a million flags. But hornpipes is quite productive. When you find hornpipes, you know you're in basically the right place. But it's something that I recommend. And you can look for particulars, trying to find particularly, for example, performed in Washington. At least if he was not reviewed by the newspapers in the Washington area at the time. But you can find a lot of digitized newspapers, and that's accessible to everybody online.
Is that the Chronicling America project?
No, I'm not sure it's called that.
Yeah, because that's a huge newspaper project, and it is great for historical searching. I think, what do they have? They have millions of pages up now, and they're continually adding to it. Can I just also say that the American Folklife Center, I think, is the most important division, but there are actually other divisions at the Library of Congress, including the music division and motion pictures and recorded sound, both of which have early Irish recordings and sheet music and songsters that we don't have in our division. So when you're using library resources, it's always good to think widely about what you want. And then we also have on our website a little link that says Ask a Librarian. And that's actually taken very seriously here. So if you have a question and you send it in to us, we'll not only answer from the American Folklife Center, but we'll find someone at music or MBRS or whatever division that might help you to help assist you with your query.
Yes, it's quite interesting to see. I did a search on the digital linked service as well, and I found that you could find a lot of material that's already there that I've got in the data set we have, links into the music division. But there was one time I thought about going across to the different divisions as well, but it would be a 16-year project, I think, with a team of 10. So so if anyone has any more questions, here we go. Well, one of the things I found about, say, musicbrains.org is another resource that we were using. And it doesn't, unless a person is an artist, you don't really get onto that, and you have to have kind of recorded as well. So I'm very interested in that question in that way. I don't know if there's other plans or alternatives in the library, but it's quite...
I mean, for a system like this, a big piece of it is having an authority record. So here at the library, there's authority records. So for more well-known individuals, they usually have some source of an authority, but then you can also create your own authority. So yeah, I would say it's an appropriate system for something like that.
There's probably more politicians with authority records than there are musicians. Just a guess.
So we can compute that once this is all finished, right? But yeah, so I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I know we're short on time here, but I'd like to invite some of the musicians to come up on stage here, and we'll have a few tunes at the end. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to play one of the most popular tunes from the collection, the Fisher's Hornpipe, and go into Miss MacLeod's Reel, and then finishing off probably with the Books of Oranmore if we have time. Also, I'd like to thank the panel here. They've been really interesting, the input that they've given, and to have this collaboration happening, and seeing people come from all different places and to come here on a Thursday, I really appreciate it.